Welcome back to Horses of Courses. I'm Tinia.
I'm Suzanna.
And we want to welcome you into 2025. This is our first podcast of the new year. That means we made it through one full year of podcasting, Suzanna.
What a long year it was.
And how many things we talked about.
A lot.
If you're listening to this, we're curious, what was your favorite topic in the previous 12 months? If you have suggestions, please let us know. If there are topics you'd like us to cover, we would be happy to consider those. We are kind of restructuring the format of the podcast, and in the new year, we're looking to have some guests and to incorporate video. That was a goal for last year, but I just never could quite get my act together. But maybe in 2025, that'll be the year I get it together.
I hope not.
So if the format sounds a little different to you, we're not forgetting what we were doing. We're just kind of coming up with different topics and subject matter, and hopefully it will actually be more entertaining if that's even possible.
Are
So,
we hiring a comedian?
I feel like I'm a comedian.
Are we going to sing and dance?
I think we're so funny. We crack ourselves up. Maybe no one else. Or the way we crack other people up is a different kind of cracking up.
What's that? Oh, the horse's paw.
Yeah, just so you all know, we usually tell you where we're coming from. Right now we're at Southern Equine Veterinary Center with Dr. Hughes. She's not a guest, but she did just see a Nero, which is a recent saddlebred stallion that came into the rescue. We brought him here for some x-rays. So if you hear any background noise, that's a Nero telling us he's ready for me to get this trailer on the road. But first, we're going to talk about joint injections.
Oh, boy.
Joint injections. Sometimes I think I need joints injected. My elbow, for instance, needs an injection. Unfortunately, there's not a rescue taking care of me, so I can't have the injection I need.
They would just say you were a euthanasia.
So, joint injections, Susanna, I certainly don't want to tell you that we're veterinarians, even though sometimes we channel our internal vet that exists within us. But through the years, we've done injections, and we've opted not to, depending on lots of different things. One thing that comes to my mind is I know a lot of folks that will want to inject joints that they assume are the locations of pain, and maybe that definitely is the location, and the veterinarian can be very sure that it is, but they don't know what that joint actually looks like. And why does that matter? Well, it matters because what's happened inside of that joint could be such that you're not actually doing the horse any favors. That it's really not going to, that you're disguising something that's really, really bad to the horse's detriment. So I personally would ask anyone that has a horse where injections are part of the conversation, we won't do it without an x-ray.
No.
And even if it's a joint that's been injected, if we decide that later on we're going to do it again, I want a new x-ray, because what has changed in that joint, that's important for me. And Susanna's husband has some neck and back issues. Has he ever had injections in his neck?
No, he had cadaver bones put in them.
Oh, and so he's at the point where he has to have surgery, probably on the neck again.
I don't know. They told him they weren't real sure another surgery would be any use. The jury's still kind of out on that.
So what always comes to my mind about doing injections, a lot of people like knees. A lot of people get their knees injected.
My dad did, and it helped him for 2 years.
2 years. And then at the end of that, what had to happen?
He had to have a knee surgery.
Was it a replacement?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you think about injections, keep in mind that, even in people, in human medicine, usually you can just get by with injections a little while. And I know people that their first injections don't work and do them no good.
His were marvelous for 2 years.
Yeah.
But his were a combination of, I think, cortisone, and they put some kind of slippery fluid in there too.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of times, when you think about injections, keep in mind, I don't know all the types. Most people most of the time it's a steroid injection. There are some remodeling options.
But they did tell him after they injected him, though, do everything you can not to kneel down like you have been in the past. Like, if you can at all help it, don't get on your knees.
Right. And so I know some folks that have had their knees done, and weight was a big concern, and they didn't want to even do the replacements until the weight was off, and there were certain things they would never be able to do. So one thing to keep in mind is, what are you injecting? Have you seen the joint? What does the long-term picture look like? And you have to change you should have to change what the animal's doing. It's not a fix-all, and it is temporary as a rule. Like I said, there are some injections that maybe are a one and done and remodel some things. We've not had much experience with that working. The ones we've done have not worked in that capacity. But, not to say it couldn't. But what really happens a lot of time is folks, like, you inject, you don't know what the joint really looked like. You're not x-raying a year later to see, like, what's happening there. And you're continuing to do with the horse exactly what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're not willing, when we've done injections, I can't think of one time where
they were like, continue on steeplechasing.
or whatever, or even showing, like even doing circle work, right? That come up. We did some injection. We did a stifle injection, or maybe both stifles on Dorian.
I think it was one.
And we did, it was a steroid injection. And the x-rays, like, he had just some fluid in the stifles. So we did these injections. They really worked for him, got a lot of weight off of him, took him out of any type of circle work. He's just a trail partner. Got weight off of him, and it's worked well. But it would not have worked well had we continued to put him in the type of setting that was exacerbating the pain he was having and let his weight remain too high.
Circles are not great for horses anyway. Even a healthy horse, circles are rough on horses.
Well, and recently we did an OSFOS injection. When we say we did, just to clarify, veterinarian. We didn't do the injection. We had
we paid for it. That's what we should say.
We paid for it. OSFOS to be injected into Beep because she had some arthritis in the neck, pretty minor. But right away, when he diagnosed it, he said,
no more circles, no more little tiny indoor arena. Just let her go straight.
Don't have her ride in a frame.
Don't ride her in a frame. Just let her go straight and carry her head however she wants.
So it modifies when you start talking about injections. I want people to think about, what are you modifying to set the horse up for success and maybe lessen the degeneration or the chronic issue that the horse is having in the area that's being injected. And you could do everything right and the area still degenerate, as it happens in humans. Like, again, if you've ever dealt with anything, and it does depend on what is happening. Like right now, I have been having for months issues with tennis elbow, which in people is really inflammation in a joint. I haven't had it x-rayed, but in theory, probably not anything happening in terms of arthritis. But there's inflammation in the joint due to repetition and movement.
It's your drinking arm.
No, it's my right arm. I'm left-handed. I will have to say, thank the Lord, it is not my left arm. My right arm, but I am kind of ambidextrous, so I do a lot of things with my right arm, and it's been a source of a lot of pain. So an injection in that, like a steroid injection, probably would help. And there's not actually degenerative stuff happening there, but in horses,
you haven't been x-rayed though. You don't know.
I don't know. I haven't been x-rayed because I don't have any insurance, so I just gotta tough it out. But I, you know what, I would definitely I would like an x-ray, and I would like to know for sure. So I wouldn't want a doctor to say, let's just inject that. I'd like to see what that looks like. So the same for the horse. If you're going to spend the money for an injection, I personally think you should get the x-rays. And understand, we just recently had a horse that, Suzanna had known this little horse its whole life. Yeah. She ultimately, was turned over to us, at around 6 years old. And she had a club foot in the hind. And I think that did set her up for that leg to have some arthritis because of the way she carried that.
What was an unmanaged clubfoot, unfortunately. Yeah. It was originally termed as a very minor grade clubfoot, and then it was not managed. And
so the way that probably changed the way she carried that side, I'm sure impacted. She was adopted out twice. She came back to us after injections.
With no x-ray.
Without the x-rays. Clearly, what they had injected had ended up being exactly where the issues were, but because when she came back to us, we x-rayed. But it was 6 to 8 weeks after the injections, no change. It did not help her. And the x-rays just really showed a lot going on. It was more than probably the injections could have managed, but it really is a horse-to-horse situation. So it didn't help her. We did opt to euthanize because she was very uncomfortable, and really there wasn't a good option left. And she was not that old, but the x-rays are what really told the full story. And we've had people come on the page and say, oh, x-rays don't tell you, a horse can't speak to you. So yes, the x-rays do. They're incredibly important. And if you see a terrible x-ray and the horse is dealing with it, then the horse is just being
Stoic.
A good chap, right?
Yeah.
Yes, the horse is being a good chap. And some of them really are tough. They don't really have a choice. A horse doesn't get a lot of choice. So I guess like the takeaway on the joint injections to me would be try to get your x-rays, ask for the long-term prognosis. Joint injections are not likely to carry a horse on for 10 years. They don't in humans. There are very rarely instances where I've known anybody who had injections more than a couple of years successfully.
Yeah.
So at the end, you're giving, and then ask yourself, why are you doing it? Why, to what end are you trying to get more use out of the horse? And is that the right question? Or answer to the question? I want more use out of the horse.
More of that particular type of use.
Yeah.
Whatever it...
I guess I would be happier to hear the answer. I love the horse and I want to give them as many good days as possible. Okay. Yeah, sure. As long as the injections are working and you're modifying things to really make sure they're good days. But if the answer is, I want to be able to do what I want to do with the horse. And so I'm going to cover up. And in some instances, that kind of is what's happening. I want to cover up where the horse can't feel it. The horse isn't feeling the degenerative situation that's happening. Maybe their stifles are bone on bone, right? Like that's why x-rays, I think, are so important.
That's why we don't like pin firing and that kind of stuff either.
Well, pin firing, as far as I know, is not even allowed and is considered unethical. Now they call it freeze firing, which is different, but still kind of the same kind of outcome, as far as I know. I don't know as much about that, but as far as I know, pin firing is not allowed anymore. It's freeze firing.
Still doesn't seem fair.
It's not something that I would personally do. So I guess at the end of that, when you're doing something for the horse, are you treating and curing? No. As a rule, injections aren't. Now, again, there are some that suggest that they remodel and that's a one and done and it changes things. But a lot of times it really is not a cure. It's not a cure. And so just keep that in mind. I think a lot of people don't realize it. The way people throw around that inject it, I think it's one of those kind of overused. Just like, I give the horse a bunch of butte before I ride it. Well, I mean, there are arguments on both sides. I know somebody who, they say, when I get up, I have to take a leave to get going. Well, we have that choice. Horses don't, so we can't always give them a choice about everything, and that's why we're the caregivers. Up next, we're going to talk about the donation Heart of Phoenix could use this month.
Yeah.
We can use a lot of things, but what we thought would be a great idea is, if you're a listener and you're engaged enough to tune in once a month to be with us 30 minutes to an hour, maybe you want to hear about how you can help the rescue. And a lot of people, I think, like to hear something specific. So the specific need this month is chopped alfalfa. And it's not hard to give it. If you go to chewy.com, you can look up Heart of Phoenix and our wish list. We have it on our wish list. Sometimes it gets sold out, but it's a probiotic chopped alfalfa. It's 50-pound bags. I think it's $18.99. If you buy 2 bags, you should get free shipping, I think. And it's set up where it can mail right to us. There's a couple of other options. They also sell it on Petco, and if you buy a couple of bags, of the Stanley chopped alfalfa. It is 40 pounds instead of 50. They can ship that to us. Our mailing address is 6021 Ohio River Road, Lesage 25537. So if you want to donate chopped alfalfa, we have that 2-year-old Percheron Argo that is getting a lot of chopped alfalfa. Our thoroughbreds always get it. Eve, a senior mare that's been with us a year, she gets some chopped alfalfa. So we use a lot of it. Some of our fosters need it as well. So that is a way that you can help if you just do it this month.
Send us the grass.
Yeah, we want all the grass.
Send us all the grass.
If you want to help us that way this month, next month we'll have some other need, and I think some people just really enjoy knowing exactly what they've given and what it's being used for.
I like to do things that way.
I think it does appeal to folks. I mean, certainly, we love our sustaining monthly donors that sign up to give $25 a month, and that's fantastic too. So, but if you want to know exactly what you're buying and choose it yourself and send it our way, chopped bagged alfalfa. And also I'll kind of plug the use of it. I like chopped alfalfa much better personally than cubes that you soak or pellets. Cubes. I don't like cubes, and I don't like pellets too much, but there are situations where you have to use them. We started talking about rescue stories, and that being maybe something that you, our listener, would prefer to hear about rather than adoptable horses. I think a lot of our listeners aren't in a position to adopt, but you're always in a position to hear a good story. And if you've been a follower, some of these stories you may even remember. And we have 1,200 of them. So we're not going to run out as long as we podcast at doing it once a month.
I guess we could if we stopped rescuing horses eventually.
I mean, it would take how many years? Neither of us are mathematicians.
I don't know.
1,200 stories, 12 times a year. 100 years? Is that 100 years?
I don't know, but
I don't know my math.
Of those aren't very great stories, so there's that too.
Well, but still, I mean, there's a lot of good
mundane.
Stories.
There's 30% of them are mundane stories.
Well, and so we have hundreds of big stories, and this I think
we like to talk,
and we like to talk, and I think it'll be especially good when we get to the stories where we were there on the rescue scene together. This one you weren't there, but you know enough about the story, and I know a lot of followers. It goes way, way back. It actually goes back to when we had just become a nonprofit. So we became a 501c3 in April of 2012, and this story happened on July 4th of 2012. And I think this might have been our first seizure case. I believe that this was the first time that we accepted horses that were part of a seizure. But the day before the 4th of July, we were in a derecho.
It was terrible.
It was well over 100 degrees. I had chickens dying of heat stroke.
I spent 15 days in my basement.
Which is a weird thing.
Well, it was too hot to
and
be
you had
in the
no
top of the
and
house.
you had no electric.
No electric. It was too hot.
I ended up losing like $500 worth of food in the fridge, and it was...
I remember being at Susan's and dumping alcohol down the horses' necks continuously because they were overheating.
Now, and I imagine in that barn it was rough. And so during all of this, during this time also my mom was dating Fabio, and he was in town walking around asking us what he could do to help. And I was like, unless you can make the electric come back on, sir, you can't do a thing for us.
He could have come to Susan's and dumped alcohol down
rub them down with butter.
Rub them down with butter.
I can't believe it's not butter.
So that would be very cooling.
So I got a call. Can you take these horses? Part of this legal case. It was Wayne County, West Virginia, and we said yes. But when we saw how bad they were, I was afraid to take the one mare. So the one Black Beauty was a body score of about 2, and then the other mare was at a 1 at best, and her name was Scarlett. And I didn't feel comfortable putting them both in the little trailer we had. So we moved Black Beauty to my house, and Scarlett ended up going to the Cabell Wayne Animal Shelter in Huntington, West Virginia on July 3rd. I came by, I told them what to do, what to provide her. I came by on July 4th. Everything was locked up. The fences around it are 15 feet high.
It was blazing hot.
Blazing hot. And here is this horse down, totally flat out. She appeared dead.
Baking in the sun.
Just, yeah, boiling. And there's no water near her. They poured out a bag of whole corn. There's no hay and no people around. And I lost it. And we filmed this. And if you go on our YouTube to WV Horse Rescue.
Tinia sounds very dire.
I do. I mean it. Like, I am livid. So I call 911 as I scale the fence, and I say, you know, I'm with Heart of Phoenix, and we did a horse rescue with the county, and now the county has the horse that we couldn't pick up yesterday out here with no water down. It's desperate. You've got to get in here and get these gates open so I can drive in here and get this horse out of here. So I get in there, I find this old tarp, and we cover her to create shade. And I'm just looking at her, I'm like, there's no way this horse is going to make it. She's done. There seemed like no chance yesterday. There's definitely no chance today. And she was so emaciated. She probably weighed around 600 pounds. She should have weighed around 1,200 pounds.
You think if you'd have had CMPK when you were out there, that would have helped? Because you weren't doing that back then, were you?
I had already been able to do that, but I don't think I was doing it consistently.
You were given CMPK on your first seizure?
Yeah, because we had a lot of thin horses prior. Like, it was the first seizure, but not the first emaciated horse. Oh. But she was, and I had already been raising livestock long enough at that point.
But she didn't get any though, right?
I don't think. She may have gotten it once we moved her, but she didn't get it while she was down. She may have gotten it once I got her moved. No, she didn't, because I had her put her on IV fluids, you know, which kind of accomplishing the same. But yes, I do think giving that, I would have if I'd had it. But we were able to, with 3 men, get her up and walk her with straps under her. And I remember saying, she's not going to stand in the trailer. And I have video of me, you know, because I followed the horse trailer, and, you know, just she's going to go down. There's no way we can get her where she needs to go. Well, she did stand the whole time. We get her to the foster and took her to a foster where there was a tractor. And so if she got down, the stalls were big enough to be able to get her up. We had not had a horse go down and have to use a sling. But when we unloaded her, I called my vet at the time, Chad Brown, who's now a professor at Purdue, and I said, Chad, I've got to have you out here for a horse. And he said, Tinia, I'm at a charity golf scramble on July 4th. It's Freedom Day. I'm not coming. And I was like, you've got to, Chad. This horse will die. And to his credit, he came. And he did gastronasal fluids and then put her on an IV. And this horse's skin was falling off. Like, she was so fragile that if you just touched her skin, it just wiped her skin off, and it was just raw underneath. It was horrifying. She was around 12 years old. The next day, she went down, and we went over there, and with my husband John, his dad, and then our vice president at the time's husband Tony, we were able to MacGyver a sling from the beams of the barn. And back then I just had a flip phone. So the only photos we have are these grainy flip phone photos. Nothing taken where you can really clearly see how awful it was. And they would lower her down and let her rest periodically through the next couple of days. But by, I think, the end of the second day or the third day, she was able to stand on her own, and she never went back down.
She was kind of lively hanging there.
She was pretty lively. We said the only reason she survived is she was sassy. Not bad, but I mean,
she was red. That's why.
She was red, and she...
if she'd have been a bay, she'd have been like, no, I'm done.
And we named her Scarlett because the farm there was called Wee Tara, from miniature Tara from Gone with the Wind. And eventually, the first foal born in the rescue was named Rhett. I'm trying to think. We did a few other names from that. But she, in 3 months, was 100% like at weight. You know, I wouldn't say in hindsight what I understand now about recovery, you know, muscle and just overall health. doesn't really come back that quick. But for all that you could tell by looking at her, she looked like a perfectly healthy, recovered horse 3 months later. She was adopted out around the beginning of 2013, lives in a beautiful farm near the Greenbrier in West Virginia.
She looks lovely.
She's still there today in the same home in 2025. So I think she's really one of our, great stories, even though we have a lot of them. She stands out. And her, back then, I did a little video, and that's something that over the years I wish we had kept up with, but we just haven't. So there is a lot of video documentation, even though there weren't the greatest photos of that happening. There's a lot of video of her initial rescue. And so if you haven't seen that story, go check that one out. Many people didn't think it was the same horse. So many people, when we put the before and afters, they're like, that can't be the same horse, or that time frame, she couldn't have recovered that quick. And a lot of them don't recover that quick, but she sure did. And I check in on her usually every July, so we can do a kind of like around the 4th of July update on where's Scarlett 10 years later, 11 years later, etc. So she's still doing fantastic. I'll let Suzanna take it away. She got this call for our Ding-a-ling of the month.
How come I get most of the ding-a-lings?
Well, you get the phone.
Well, yeah, but sometimes it's even the messages or the ding-a-lings on something I wrote.
You read them. I do not usually.
We got a cute little spotted donkey, and what is he, like 13 hands?
No, I think he's only like 10-2.
Oh, 10-2, okay.
And named Ollie.
Ollie. And you could already tell from the photos that he probably had some rotation because he had a dip in the front of his hoof. But Tinia posted him, which I wouldn't have done because I knew people would be like, I want him, I want him, I want him.
Yeah.
And somebody called and wanted to get the jump on getting him. And I was like, well, tell me a little bit about your situation. She's like, well, I have a really lovely 7-acre field. And I'm like, ma'am, that's just not going to work for this donkey. Well, why not? And I'm like, well, because no donkey really should be in a really lovely 7-acre field. I
For
said,
sure.
They're meant to be browsers in the desert. And then you're giving them a veritable smorgasbord of all the things they're not supposed to eat. And she's like, well, how arrogant of you to tell me that this donkey won't work for me. I've had donkeys for many, many years, and they've all done fine in that. And I was like, okay.
I thought it was funny because, you can't, you know what my saying is, you can't tell people anything. And in the same token, yes, it is kind of hard. It's hard to tell us something if we've had a bunch of experiences that say otherwise. But a lot of times when people say, well, I've done it for years, if you really had someone go in and look at what they've been doing, it's pretty easy to see. Now, we didn't see this woman's donkeys.
No, we didn't see
and
donkeys.
Maybe her donkeys,
our magic donkeys
are fine. And maybe her 7-acre field she's calling lovely is actually just a feedlot. Maybe all these things, we don't know. But the truth is, it would be odd for most donkeys to not have some laminitic concerns in a nice 7-acre field.
Well, the thing is they're so stoic that, I've had multiple veterinarians and farriers tell me a donkey can be horrifically foundered and you won't know it till it's about to come through the bottom of its foot just by looking at it walk.
Yeah.
Well,
but you would be able to tell if you had any knowledge of feet, but they will hide the pain.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They hide the pain. They're very stoic.
I find them to be pretty stoic too. And so, if you're, I guess the takeaway, don't call us and tell us what the animal that's in our care needs. We have it. We have the x-rays. We know what it needs.
At that time, he wasn't x-ray, but the x-rays proved it out. He was rotated, 18% or something.
Yeah, he had, and he had some arthritic changes in some of those joints there too. But once we trimmed him and he's not rocked back, I think it'll be okay. But it's another one, kind of going back to those joint injections. He's not an animal we're talking about injecting, but we had to see the x-rays. If we had not, I will not trim a horse or have a horse trimmed or a donkey trimmed without x-rays if there's concerns about what's happening in the feet. Mm-hmm. Going into that blind is such a bad idea, and I don't want to even work with a farrier who's willing to do that. And I know farriers get out and the animal needs some help and they're not willing to trim. And the same thing vets have said, if somebody's not willing to do the x-rays, but I know this is the joint that's hurting, and that's up to them. That's what we're here today. And Dr. Hughes, with an arrow who's in our trailer right now. She said to me, I don't even really think we need the x-rays, but I was like, I would feel better having the x-rays. So you, at least I'll tell you as a supporter, we're going to get the x-rays. You can know your donor dollars are making sure that we're seeing as much as we can before we take any kind of action, whether it's an injection or trimming or deciding that the horse is going to be okay or go in the ATFO. And sometimes we don't realize there's an issue until later. But
some issues are really, really hard to find. They really are.
Yeah. And we're not going to put a founder donkey out in a 7-acre field.
No, we're not going to do that.
So we're not. So if you want to, that's up to you. We're not going to do it.
I wasn't being arrogant either.
It was just a matter of the fact. It was just the truth.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and I will say, Susanna and I, we do hear. We had another one to comment. Remember this last month? That we should take our own advice about not knowing everything.
Yeah.
And I was like, I literally wrote the post, and it had the comment was, or the statement, the overall takeaway was, always be willing to continue to learn. And they're like, well, you should take your own advice.
But the funny thing is that we
do that.
We love to learn new things.
I mean, we that's what we do constantly.
We're always chasing down something new. And
if you've listened to this podcast, many times you'll have heard me say, and I didn't know better back then, and so I wouldn't do that now. Even though we maybe because we just share so much, it's like, well, don't they think they know it all? No, but we are sharing the things that we have found to be true, and we appreciate it when others do that. But we're gonna waller it over and decide whether we want to keep that tidbit or discard it. So the kind of our main talking point this month, we talked about this about a few weeks ago when we actually messaged it to ourselves about application processing and why it's important. And then we recently kind of yesterday or day before, I did a post about NISA, and I think it even opened up more stuff to talk about applications. And I don't mean just applications applying to adopt. I mean applications when people want to train as well. And we go through applications. So when we ask folks to do an application to adopt, I want you guys to know when we are applying for a grant, there's an application process. And when we are trying to be accredited with organizations that offer accreditation, we go through intense application processes.
Much more wild than ours.
Much, much more. We're not asking anybody to do something we're not willing to do.
It's funny how people, that word application gets people's hackles up, because to buy a house, you have to do an application. To buy a car, you have to do an application. Unless you're a rich person, can pay for all these things.
For cash, yeah.
To buy a couch from somewhere, you fill out an application usually.
If you're financing anything, and if you want a job, you have to fill out an application. Yeah, if
you want a job.
If you want to volunteer places, you have to know who you're dealing with. We are very pro application, and I like a good application. And so what originally inspired me wanting to talk about this was when way back there, we received a Mustang from a bad situation, and we come to find out this trainer that had applied to do the ATFO not once but twice.
Yeah,
Twice, and everything about his application was a denial. It was an immediate denial. And we denied it, no consistent vet care. The facility was no good. The training was no good. Everything about it was no. So we knew not to send horses. But unfortunately, because there are people who don't feel like they can ask enough questions when they are looking for a trainer. A lot of private individuals sent this person horses. Another rescue sent this person horses. He abused them. He starved them. And he ended up just kind of skirting out of the state. And left behind a lot of horror.
Yeah.
And the first thing to our mind was, I'm so glad we have an application. And then recently, there was a situation in Ohio where there was a horse out, and she looked terrible. And come to find out, she was owned. And then when we heard the name of the owner, it rang a bell for me. So I went back and searched through our previous applications. In 2020, this man applied to adopt. This man was a doctor, had a very high income, and we denied his application.
Yeah.
Because everything about, he failed every part of the application except he had a high income. And if you hear that, you say, well, gosh, what chance do I have passing if a doctor with a high income didn't? If you take care of your horse, you could have had a low income and it could have, been approved. But because we screened that application, we didn't get it and think, oh, how fancy. This guy's very high income. And his credentials mean he'll take good care of it. We screened it. Everything, every reference, every photo, everything we asked had a bad answer. And so it was denied. Come to find out, after this case kind of broke open, what was a good thing we had denied it. And there were horses there he had adopted from another rescue.
Oh. I muted it and it's still doing it.
Now Suzanna not turning her phone off.
No, it's off.
Sorry about that, folks.
Maybe it has that safety feature where if they call you twice in 10 minutes, they think it's an emergency.
Probably.
Yeah, it's definitely off.
So that was another instance where, come to find out, good thing we had an application process.
Yeah.
And then,
I ran that one. I was still doing them back then.
Well, and then on the heels of all that, I did a post about Nissa talking about her having gone into two different adoptive homes that have not worked. So here's the thing, and I think this is the important thing. You can't screen everything. You have to understand, for one, you have to allow that people are imperfect. You have to allow people to make mistakes. You can't hoard horses as if you're the only one in the world that can take care of them. That's a recipe for disaster. We are not the only people in the world that can take care of the horses. What our goal is to keep the horse safe. So Nissa went into two separate homes. She was safe. Nobody didn't take care of her. But you can't know if a horse, to me, I don't think you can, is a good fit, even if you screen really well and the people have to meet the horse and they rode the horse, until you're home by yourself and the horse is under your care for a month, 2 months. Then you really see, are you going to get along with the horse? Are you going to, if you start to not be able to get along, do you take the horse and you go to a trainer?
You look at your saddle fit.
And if you do, is the person who came out and did saddle fitting for you really good at it? I mean, there's many reasons why things can unravel. And a horse under the current riding of a trainer in the setting they're used to, going through the motions that they do periodically with a new rider, even if they come back 2-3 times, it's probably going to be successful if they're even in the kind of the realm of the skill set needed. But that doesn't mean when the horse goes home and it's like, well, I don't see my trainer anywhere. Well, this feels different. Oh, you let me do this. And then you start, the horse back pedals, or any number of things. But some of the questions were, well, don't you screen the applicants? Don't you see them ride the horse?
Somebody said, well, I think you need to screen your applicants better if that horse has been returned twice.
Yeah, and I thought, well, for one, it's one of those things where people reveal their ignorance, and you don't know what you don't know. If you haven't screened applications and you don't understand, it may seem like screen better, that would get you there. And screening is important. Like we, just said, we believe in it, we do it. But it's not foolproof.
It's not.
And again, a horse going out and it not working and coming back, I mean, that's no tragedy. Because the horse comes back to us, and as a rule, the horses come back perfectly fine. But there's just no way, and you can put such burdens on people that nobody will fool with adoption. If somebody's traveling 10 hours to meet a horse, they ride the horse, it goes well, they want to adopt the horse, they've already passed the process, and you say, well, I need you to come back 3 more times. Well, I don't think you're going to learn anything new, because the horse is still in the same setting and is going to continue to be ridden by the trainer. I don't think that you would find necessarily a greater success rate of placement, but I think you would deter some good adopters.
It's a tough spot to be in, really. Adopting things out is kind of tough.
Oh, it is tough, but I really, the thing that I was thinking last night was how people get into this frame of mind that only I have the answer. And I'm sorry, sweetie, you don't. And you're not the only one that can take care of them. And so we have to remind ourselves. And it's easier for me when the horse is not at my property. I think what happens when you are the caregiver, you start to get it's more personal. So then no application looks good enough at that point. You know, I like them, so.
Well, but I do foster dogs, and I do a lot of the harder foster dogs, and we get really lovely applications, but there's some piece of it that doesn't fit this dog. It's not that I want to keep the dog. I want the dog to go to its home, but I want the dog to go and stay. Yeah. So it's not, I don't know. The applications, it's a two-way thing. Sometimes people are like, you all are too picky, and sometimes they're like, y'all are not picky enough, and...
Well, and I think it's worth saying our goal is that horses are 10,000 times harder than dogs. So I think you are a lot more apt to set a dog up for success and there's a lot that makes dog placement dramatically easier. But with horses, the goal, we want the horse to go and stay. But the fact is, if it's not an easy horse, and I don't think the horse has to be easy. I think, the horse has a right to say, I need an upper level, type of handler. And I mean, a horse doesn't have to be a deadhead, and it doesn't have to be super, super easy. But we don't have enough people able to take those horses and really succeed with them. And it's an investment of time and money that some people just are not able or interested in doing. So, we want the horse to go and stay, but realistically, while we believe in screening, no matter what you do, when you're talking about equine placement, you can't be certain until that person has the horse at home. They're not certain they're going to get along with the horse. There are people who've adopted horses, they ride just fine, but they just don't like them. The horse don't like the person don't like the horse, whichever way. We have that right now. We placed a mare, a thoroughbred mare.
Yeah.
And the lady's done everything right. And the horse just does not like her.
Likes her trainer, but not her.
And I'm sure it hurts her feelings. But horses...
She's like, I've tried everything. I've tried feeding her cookies. I've tried softer brushes. I've tried this. I've tried that. I can't... She likes my trainer, pricks up her ears, and acts really happy when my trainer comes around, and she pins her ears at me.
And here's the thing. I know people will hear that and think, well, there's something she's doing. Absolutely not. That does not have to have anything to do with it. There are people, there's that quote, there are people that no matter what you do are never going to like you. And there are horses that no matter what you do, they're not going to like you. They just don't. Something about your aura pokes them the wrong way.
It's an ego problem when you can't admit that there are a few horses out there that don't like you.
Yeah.
I've had a couple that I've been like, Tinia, this horse is going to have to move because we just don't like each other.
Yeah.
Not that I hated the horse. It's just, there's just something about us that just didn't mesh.
And I don't always know right away that I'm not going to get along with a horse. I mean, and so that's, again, why it takes time. So it's not, to me, it's not a bad thing if, to let a horse go and see if things can work. There have been placements where we didn't think it was going to work, but on the paper, we weren't seeing a reason it couldn't, but we just didn't feel like it would, and it ended up going great, So, if you really, it's also an ego problem if you think that nobody's good enough for the horse and you never let anybody have a chance. And so we try really hard. And I think I've had to check myself through time if I'm attached to the horse and just say, look, we have to give this horse an opportunity to have a home. A rescue is an orphanage. It is not where a horse should spend its life. A horse deserves to have a home, and it doesn't have to be a perfect home. I didn't grow up in a perfect home. I'm sure you didn't either, and nobody listening to this did. When we raise kids, if you raise kids, you make mistakes. It doesn't make you a bad mother, no more than an adopter, being imperfect. So, screen, have an application, be willing to fill it out. That's great, but understand it's not foolproof, and you're not expected to be perfect at the end of it. And you don't want to make people keep a horse that they're not getting along with because they're afraid of being shamed for returning the horse. Yeah. So, I'm that, the folks who adopted Nissa, it didn't work. It wasn't the right skill set. There was no way to know till the horse went home. They, when they left, thought it was going to work. And I know that they wanted it to work, and it did not.
Well, they rode her nicely at our facility.
And it was just fine. So nobody had any reason to think that it wouldn't. So you never want people to feel so ashamed that they don't try a horse, or that they keep a horse that everybody involved is disappointed and unhappy, but they're afraid that they will be made to feel less for saying, hey, it's not working.
That isn't to say that we let every approved applicant ride every horse that we have, though, because some of the application references make very clear that this horse is not going to be who you should even put your foot in the stirrup.
Well, no, I mean, so our application tries to gauge your skill set before you ever come. You can't just because you're approved to adopt doesn't mean you can meet and try to ride any horse, you know. We often even require a riding video ahead of time. So that's where we are on applications. You know, I'm always interested in feedback on the application that we have, as far as like what would make it better but still effective. So we were going to wrap up this month's like year kickoff, going into our second year podcasting, talking about what I think ultimately probably led me to Heart of Phoenix in a way. I don't know necessarily that is Suzanna's take, but horses help heal people. And it's January is a bad month for me. It's a tough month. And some of you all, I think when we first started the podcast, I went over this briefly, but I'm not positive.
I think we just touched on it really
Yeah.
lightly.
Yeah, and if you followed Heart of Phoenix long, or me specifically, you probably already know the story, but I remember one thing that Noah at Steady Horse said to me: tell your story all the time, because don't assume somebody else has heard it. And that's something that kind of registered with me. I thought, you never know who hasn't heard a story, and if you have one, then tell it. And so for me, I grew up with horses, but I hadn't had horses in my life from the time I was 18 years old until my mid-20s at all. Zero involvement with horses. And what happened is I'm the oldest of 6, and I grew up kind of parenting my younger siblings a lot. And my dad was almost 60 years old when I was born, and he was 70 years old when my little brother was born, and he was 80 years old when my little sister was born. And I always knew he would not live very long, you know. I just knew growing up that my dad's not going to be here very long. So, and I gave me, I guess, a lot of reverence for him, and I was always extremely attached to him. So I'd always expected I wouldn't have him, but the way things actually happened is on January 13th in 2007, I had just moved back from Florida because I just could not live away from my little brothers and sister. I knew they needed me. They had lived with me on and off before I moved away the previous year. It had been very hard on me to not be in West Virginia with them, and it had been very hard specifically on my little sister Angel, who was 17 at the time, for me to not be with her. And so I'd moved back so that I could be with them and my dad. You know, my dad was in his 80s at the time. He was 80, I think he was 85. So I came back so I could be with them. And that was all really that mattered. So I got back the beginning, or say the middle of December of 2006. So I was back right at 28 days. We'd gotten through Christmas and the New Year, and we got a call that the apartment building that my brother Ben, who was 19 and going to Marshall University, that his apartment building was on fire, and my little brother Quentin, who was 14, was staying with him that night, and my little sister was staying with him, and she was 17. They were in the building, and they couldn't get out. And so various things were miscommunicated because everyone's hysterical. Ultimately, by the time I got to the apartment building, I mean, it was totally engulfed in flames. My mom was there. My little sister, my baby sister, was 2 years old. she was just kind of flung to the side somewhere, and my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, and he would have been in his early 20s, they're just out on the sidewalk and everybody's hysterical. And this is the building, I don't know how many stories they were, I think on the maybe the eighth floor in the back of the building. And I mean, when I got there, I knew it was too late. They wouldn't let anyone in. I mean, my mom, they had already tried to take her away, and lock her up because she kept trying to get in. And I got there an hour into it, so I knew they were never coming out. And I had my little boy who was 5 with me, and I remember just getting my little sister and carrying her, because my mom was in no state to even know she was there, carrying the little sister around just for, hours as the building just kept burning down. And the next day I had to go. My dad was sleeping in his store. He had a little store, and he didn't want anybody to break into it. And he was sleeping on a rollaway bed in the store with no heat, just an electric blanket, and that's just how he was. And then I had people were, wanting to go in and wake him up and tell him. His other kids, I had half siblings from, he was much older, so he had family way before I was ever born. They wanted to go in, and I said, you can't wake my daddy up and tell him nothing. You leave him alone, and I'll go in and tell him. So then I had to tell him, that his babies had died, and it was a nightmare. And so, as a result of losing them, what I always say is I hadn't had horses, but the only thing I grew up with when I think about childhood, the thing I think was Tinia loved horses, and I had my brothers and sister, and that's all there was, Daddy. And then my dad, Daddy died mercifully a couple years later and didn't have to continue living with that trauma anymore, but I hate that he ever had to live any of it. And my papa died, and he was my connection to horses. He is how I had horses in my life as a young person. So horses, like, for me, they connect back to everything I knew when I was young, and I was the person that I remember that I can't be anymore. So when I ended up creating Heart of Phoenix in the early days, I think it was because I had to have something. I had to be doing something worthwhile, and I had never imagined horse rescue, and honestly, I didn't even have the skill set, I don't think. But what has happened through Heart of Phoenix, that action constantly, knowing that night I was too late, I couldn't get the kids out, being able to go through the rest of my life, getting there in time, for horses, I think has been very important to me. And I think even though it took some years for me to make that connection, that, like, I'm not too late. And I think I take it really hard when we are too late, or if it goes wrong. But I always can try again. I get to go in and there's going to be another case, and we're going to fix it that time. And having that control over helping has been very important to me. And the other part is that through Heart of Phoenix, and I think Suzanna would say this, you meet all these people that you get to do this with, and it's not, you can't ever replace people. There's no replacing being Angel and Quentin in any way. But when people are gone and they leave this big deficit, there is this hole. And even though somebody doesn't take their place, you do find that people kind of stand in what I like to say, stand in the gap that's left. So all the people that do this with me through the years become, in an extension, a type of family. And it makes it easier to go on. So in January, that's always on my mind. My brother did a thing where saying it's just another day. It's not like it's harder this day. And I thought maybe it isn't for everybody, but for me, that day is harder, and that month, because you can't hardly get it out of your mind. Once I get through January, I stow it for a while and kind of go forward. Like I say to John all the time, you can guarantee Tania's going to proceed to the root. I'm gonna go
You
on.
shouldn't have proceeded to the route yesterday.
No, yesterday when I said proceed to the route, I met a bridge. If you all get on Facebook, you can find the photo where it says road closed, and I'm in a trailer, and there's no way to move
When I
forward.
asked for a picture of a bridge yesterday, I didn't mean for you to take it that far.
And I had to wallow the trailer. There was nowhere to go to turn around. It was but I got out of there. I got out of that other situation. I'm moving forward, and I got out of that one yesterday, and ultimately got turned around and went, but I had to go backward. So,
Yeah. So my story is just a little bit different than that, and I don't think I technically. Well, I kind of did get into the horse rescue because of a tragedy that happened in my life, but it was an accident. So, right before I moved to Kentucky, the reason why we moved to Kentucky is because I had a best friend who lived down the road from me, 7 houses down the road, and we were in each other's pockets all the time. Like, we were always running in and out of each other's houses. We were pretty much together every day. And each of us had 3 kids, and the kids considered themselves siblings, and we just had so many things that we did together. Those kids had never been camping, and we took them on their first and only camping trip because their mother died shortly after that. And just so tangled up with my best friend and her children. And then she, at the suggestion of a doctor that she worked for, combined 2 medications that she shouldn't have. And I don't know what possessed her, but took those and got in the bathtub and ultimately drowned. And so I was on my way down to her house because we did a Bible study together every night, and walked in, and her mother was there, and then the ambulance pulled in right behind me, and they couldn't bring her back. And so I had to watch her be carried out of the house, not resuscitated, and it just rocked my world. I couldn't live there anymore because that house was just 7 houses down the street from me, and there was a lot of gossip in the city about that big mess. And we started looking for a new place to moved to Kentucky, and accidentally stole a Heart of Phoenix horse. And I think in the beginning, Tinia just drove me nuts because the way she wrote just drove me nuts, because I like for things to make sense, and a lot of times her stuff had a good story, but a lot of it didn't make any sense, and I'm like, what is she saying? And so I started correcting that so that it would make sense, and then just kind of got drug into it, and kind of found some people I think are like family, like Tinia and I are pretty tangled up now, and she came to my kids' wedding and did all of my kids' graduation photos, and my kid trained her goat of a horse, and so we spend hours on the phone, sometimes just talking about innocent things, but sometimes solving world problems, and do a pretty good job with that. So I think, like she said, you can't replace the people that you lost, and Tinia's nowhere near similar to what my best friend was at all. And but she has kind of become the person who's standing in that gap. So that's kind of where we are.
But her birthday was in January.
Her birthday was in January.
Yeah, her birthday
7th.
was in January. Yeah, and so Susanna was like, maybe with that, let's kick the second year off with that. Because people's stories matter, and I think that I know many people hear me tell this story over and over, but there are plenty of people who haven't heard it. And to me, I could never talk about it enough, but I don't personally like to talk about it. I like to write about it. To me, it's very different.
I think people knowing that that anybody has had such a big thing happen and gone on to do good things with their life is kind of important, because there might be somebody out there who just had a tragedy 6 weeks ago, and they're like down in the bottom of a mud pit, and they don't know where in the world they're going to go.
Well, I know, so the way Heart of Phoenix evolved, it came from, I had what was a farm page when I used to do homestead stuff, and now it's more just a writing page. The number of people that reach out to me over the years that reading the stories, you know, and that makes such a difference to them. I mean, to me, I mean, it's impactful to me. It reminds me how important it is that you share. I have a saying where I say there's no value in quiet tragedy. If people,
Boy, you've embraced that.
right? We ain't going to be quiet about it. And so letting people know, that for one, it's okay to tell the story. And I think also for people, I always think about, you never know who feels like they can't move forward and go on, and that they realize, gosh, there are people out there that will be this upset that I'm gone for 18 years, that 18 years later, if I don't move forward, that in 18 years, somebody that cares about me could still be this wrecked that I'm not there. There are people who need to hear that, you know, that it's that important you stick around, because I mean, 18 years later, I don't feel any better about not having, you know, my sister or my little brother. So that stuff matters, but also that connection to horses. Horses, I don't know that I personally get that therapy value of going out and just brushing a horse like that.
That's not therapy for me.
It's not for me. But being able to go in and see a horse live a better life and being able to change their situation, that helps me.
Yeah.
So, you know,
also seeing the way that other people connect with the
yes.
horses that we've pulled out of like Tonks and Arian, is that her name? Ariel? How do you pronounce her name? Ariel.
No, there's no L in it.
There's no L? Well, anyway, that connection for me is, I love to see that connection.
Well, Rita and Terry.
Yeah.
There are other ones, though, that I love. I'm like drawing a blank, but I mean, there are really beautiful stories.
It is Arian. I was questioning myself.
But, I thought you were saying Ariel.
No, I was saying Arian, and then I said, or is it Ariel?
I'm trying to think of some. I mean, just so that they hear it. Like, there are some stories that every time I see, I'm like, look how beautiful that is. And I love that there are people that are
Armani and the kid.
Yeah, Armani, and that story is lovely. But I'll tell you another one is being able to see people that have been very troubled, and those are their stories, and I'm not going to tell them, but the number of people that we know that have come and volunteered or worked at Heart of Phoenix that were troubled
probably
people.
90% of the people have some kind of a thing.
And to watch people get better through the horse rescue, the number of people stories are pretty incredible, and to be able to watch them get a whole new lease, I guess, on life, or just change the outlook, or develop a group of people where they have something or value in themselves or whatever. That happens constantly, and that, to me, again, that's where I find the value.
People say that people say, oh, you all rescue horses. Well, a lot of times we end up rescuing people, too.
I think we rescue as many people as we've ever rescued horses. So, all right, we're going to end on that, because I think we've probably pushed our kind of goal of an hour there beyond. Oh, an hour and 2 minutes.
Oh, my. You said you wanted to go longer.
Well, we did. So, anyway, that's Horses of Courses. I'm Tinia.
I'm Suzanna.
We'll see you next month.